This is Revolutionizing Recruitment with Kathleen Duffy, the art of attracting, acquiring, and retaining talent. Here's Kathleen.
My guest this week is Hung Lee, the editor of the leading industry newsletter, Recruiting Brainfood. Hung has years of experience as an agency recruiter, recruitment manager, internal head of talent, recruitment trainer, and founder of an award-winning online recruiting platform. Hung, welcome to the podcast.
My pleasure to be here, Kathleen. Thank you so much for inviting me on.
It's really fun to be able to speak with you, Hung. You know, in doing some research on your background and whatnot, I looked at your LinkedIn profile and I read that you read social anthropology.
That is correct. Yes, I was a budding anthropologist when I was a young man. So I had this vision that I'd be some sort of Indiana Jones style figure interacting with like local communities in a jungle environment. That was the initial plan before I became a recruitment person.
So I have to be honest with you. I had to look up, thank God for Wikipedia, what the definition of a social anthropologist is. And so for those of the rest of us that don't know, Wikipedia describes it as someone who seeks to understand how people live in societies and how they make their life meaningful. So, tell me how that spawned your interest in recruiting.
You know what? I think they're very closely related in an obvious way. I mean, social anthropology is part of that cluster of social sciences, which is about studying how people interact, particularly interact in groups. How do they work in communities? How do they collaborate on projects and what have you? And of course, when you kind of layer that lens onto the world of work, then it becomes pretty obvious that anything related to people-related work is going to be relevant to it. Although I have to say at the time, when I was studying anthropology, I had no ambition or any vision of working in recruiting. It was really an academic pursuit, and I really thought my career would be pretty much down the academic line. Sort of ending up in a kind of a related field, I would say, is definitely a matter of happenstance and circumstance.
I think it's interesting. I think a lot of us fall into the career of recruiting because, and I have a bit more gray hair than you, but it really wasn't talked about as a career opportunity, at least here in the United States. I don't know if that changed out in UK.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think it's generally considered as, certainly in terms of the white collar work, it's considered to be a fairly low status job. It's not something that you would probably ever have an ambition to go for, certainly not at a young age. That is unfortunate, but I think also having been in recruiting, and I'm sure you might agree with me on this, Kathleen, where we've seen it's one of those career paths where anybody can kind of get into it. There really isn't a barrier to entry, and therefore there's a huge variety of different types of people and different types of service delivery models in recruiting. That I think contribute a little bit to that sort of status problem, shall we say, that recruiters have.
Yeah, well, we are at the top of the food chain right now in this economy, right?
100%, actually. It has been a complete role reversal. So there's no doubt that this crazy moment that we're in and continuing craziness that we're in has really reversed itself from the market as we saw it only 12 months or so ago. Recruiters are in super high demand. So much so, actually, that I actually launched a job board a couple of months ago specifically for recruiters because I was getting inundated with requests from employers saying, hey, can you help me recruit this person? Or, hey, can you post some of these jobs in your newsletter and get me some visibility? And I was getting hundreds of job requests every single week, Kathleen. You wouldn't believe it. Mm-hmm. And so in the end, I just thought, you know what, I needed to create some sort of better solution for it. It's crazy times, crazy good times to be in the business.
I know, we're living the dream. We're living the dream. So I can't, not kick things off with congratulating you on winning the Recruitment Impact Award at the 2021 Recruiter Awards. Congratulations, Hung. That's a big deal.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. I was actually really shocked when I I found out that I was even nominated for this. I had no idea until Dee, the award organizer, called me up and said, "Hey, can you make it to this event?" And I said, "Yeah, what?" And she gave me a date that I couldn't make typically, so I wasn't even able to collect the award. But she did tell me at that point, "Yeah, you actually have won this, and we need you to record a thank you speech in order to show at the event." And yeah, it was really quite surprising, really humbling, and the fact that it was voted for by the community here in the UK was really an important moment, I think, for me.
I think to be recognized by your peers, there's nothing better than that.
Right.
When you think back with receiving this award as voted on by your peers and having some time to process through that, even afterwards, what does it really, really mean to receive this award?
I guess it will mean different things to different people. I mean, my first thought when I was told that, I'd won this thing, I was a little bit of like imposter syndrome, It was like, at the end of the day, I'm not doing anything that's like particularly difficult to do. I'm basically writing a newsletter. I'm doing like a video live stream every week. I'm talking to people. I'm trying to stitch communities together. It doesn't feel to me like super difficult work to do. So my first instinct was to say, you know what, like, have they got the wrong person here? Or have they clearly thought through how this thing should be awarded? But then I kind of sat into it and I realized, I was nominated by community members who I don't know. I was voted for by the bunch of people who, again, I don't know. And I guess it tells me that, the things that you're doing, however small you might think they are, they're having some sort of positive impact. And the way I see what Recruiting Brainfood is that it doesn't make decisive impact to anybody's career or workday. But what it might do is always be there to help. That's basically how I see it. It's one of those things that you can absolutely rely on, and it might make your work a little bit easier or a little bit better if I can give you an angle or give you a tip or give you a technique or an introduction to somebody who you didn't know. Those types of things can kind of make your day from being, a -1 to a +1. So, I'm happy that people feel this way about it, and it gives me motivation to keep going.
It's interesting that you say it's not super difficult, but it is. And, certainly it would be for me. But I think the big thing is that you did it and nobody else did. And that's what we recognize in you, Hung, right, is that you saw a need and you took care of this. And it does make a difference to all of us out there. As a matter of fact, I would like to thank you, because when my book came out, you were one of the first people to note it and share it with their community. So I want to thank you and the impact that you've made for me personally.
You're very welcome, Kathleen. Thank you for your very kind words here.
So let's talk about Recruiting Brainfood a little bit more. From what I understand, it started for your personal use. Is that right?
Absolutely. I had a problem. Basically, the internet was too big, was how I found it. There's just so much information out there. We didn't have a problem with the volume of information, but it became a problem finding the good bits of it. It was a daily task. You had to click through 10 articles to find one thing that was worth keeping and adding value. And I ended up just like collecting, I guess I'm also a bit of a taxonomist at heart as well. So I ended up just collecting like a bunch of links and, categorizing them in certain ways so that I had a resource that would be useful to me going forward. And it just occurred to me that, after a while of doing this, it kind of occurred to me that other people might actually have the same problem. Recruiting is a super busy job. If you're doing it well, typically you're already at 110%. You don't really have the time to discover new things, and you're very reliant on certain channels to deliver you those things that are going to help you get better at your job. So, in the end, I just thought, how is the easiest way in which I could let other people get access to this database that I'd created? And in the end, I just thought, maybe the best way to do it would be to set up a newsletter, send it out. If people sign up to it, great. If they don't, no worries. I'm kind of doing this for myself anyway. And lo and behold, people started getting value out of it. So yeah, that's basically how it started.
So how much time do you spend gathering this content for the community?
You know what? That's a really interesting question that I can't put a number on, because the reality of it is I don't actually search for it. The technique that I've got is essentially just being in the middle of lots of information flow, and then being able to kind of spearfish good stuff out there. So I'm never carrying out searches. I'm never kind of typing into a search engine to say see what's cool or not. I'm just in communities, and I'm in kind of different streams. I'm listening to things all the time and reading things all the time. And if I see something and I think, you know what, probably the recruiting industry will not see this if I don't amplify it, then I'm going to pick it out and say, you know what, that may be something that goes into Brainfood at some point.
So I guess this is where your academic pursuit is coming to fruition for you, huh?
Probably a little bit, yeah. The idea of like being able to collect information and retrieve it, I think, is a huge problem. It's actually a classic recruiting problem, right? I'm sure you get this a lot, Kathleen, where people say, "Hey, Kathleen, do you know someone who could do X?" And through your career, of course, you would know this person, but can you retrieve that person's name right there and then? Answer's no. You need a system to be able to help you do that. So I think this is a very familiar problem. It's same with academics, but it's very similar to what we do in recruiting. Recruiters generally know like times 100 the number of people and normal people know, but we're not able to instantly pull that information out. We need to have a system. So I guess where most of my colleagues and friends in the industry have systems of organizing candidates and organizing people, I've got a system of organizing information. But I suspect the mechanics are very similar.
Yes, I would think so. So you do the Recruiting Brainfood curation, and then you are also the CEO of Workshape.io, right?
That is correct, yeah.
So how do you balance all of that?
The answer is you don't. I mean, I was riding those two horses for a long time, and it became something that was really quite difficult to manage. Ultimately, so the idea behind Recruiting Brainfood was to do it completely vendor agnostic. So it was meant to be, hey, it's got no relationship with anything to do with Workshape. It has to be completely clean from that, so that other people aren't gonna. Because basically, people need to trust it as being a source of objectivity. So in the end, I had to compartmentalize. But over time, essentially one became bigger than the other. And there wasn't, I would say, any major switchover. But there was a case where ultimately I realized that the community was asking more from me as a curator of Recruiting Brainfood than it was asking me to be a supplier of tech candidates, which is what Workshape generally does. So whilst Workshape is still active as a platform, it's basically very much a self-serve tool at this moment, where companies can come and use it as they see fit. Take out a subscription and connect with the software engineers. That would be what they need to do there. But it isn't something that takes a huge amount of my day. So focus is now nearly 100% on Recruiting Brainfood these days.
Okay, well, that's why I was wondering, do you ever sleep?
I sleep actually more than most. I'm getting on, Kathleen. I need my 8 hours. So yeah, I mean, I'm quite defensive on my sleep. I have to be honest. I don't know whether you're the same, but the days of me doing all-nighters and doing crazy things, they're long in the past, and thank the Lord for that. So yeah, I sleep more than okay. Don't worry about me.
Okay, I won't. Great. So, one of the other things that I found really fascinating about what you've been doing is about how you built your personal brand and your professional brand. And I'm a huge proponent, and I talk to a lot of organizations here in the States about how to build their personal brand and how to tell their story. Tell us about how you built your personal professional brand and really how intentional you were in going about that.
That's a really important point, Kathleen. And we're also, I think, it's very timely as well, isn't it? I think personal brand as an idea really emerged when social media became a thing in the late noughties to early tens and so on. But it's really taken a turn. I think it's going to be difficult for a lot of business leaders in the current times to not have a personal brand. It's almost like if you don't have anything on there, then it itself is saying something about how you communicate. So it's probably something all of us need to really embrace. My own way of doing it is to really be as open as possible. So I kind of practice what I call an open kitchen type approach, which is essentially not overthinking and not overproducing anything, but trying to do as much in public as I can. Whether that's creating a new channel, whether that's talking to people in the community, whether it's thinking about the next project or whatnot. I try to do that as openly as I can, often in advance of that thing being anywhere near ready. I think one of the things that is difficult about personal branding, it's difficult for a lot of people, should I say, is the feeling that they need to have a complete story to tell before they're prepared to tell it. I hear a lot of people who, say, yeah, I want to get into blogging, I want to do podcasting, I want to do this, and this. But you know what? You never see them output anything. And you wonder why that is. And, ultimately, I think it's because they're over prepping it, overthinking it, and they're kind of waiting for a perfect moment or a perfect kind of bit of content before they're saying anything. And I think that's a shame. I think what you need to do is really just get it out there and start talking to people in a public way. And that in itself, if you like, is the brand strategy. So, insofar as it's intentional, it probably isn't by design. I don't think it's like I dreamt up the strategy of doing it this way. I just realized as a person that doesn't have a lot of like excess capacity, don't have a lot of resources to rely on, I realized that I couldn't afford to be polished, if that makes any sense. I couldn't afford to overproduce anything. So this is why, for instance, Brainfood Live is a live show. It wasn't because I really thought live was amazing, even though I do, but it's primarily driven because I couldn't basically be bothered to do any post-production on it. And I thought, you know what? This is it. I'll just get it out there. And if people like it, they like it. If they don't, they don't. That's okay. And that broadly is how Brainfood operates. It's essentially to say, look, it's one guy doing all of this stuff. It's not going to be perfect most of the time, but it is going to be honest. And it is going to be out there. And you can expect the consistency to be there and not be in a situation where, I'm going to be lost in the weeds trying to make something perfect. Because really what you got to do is get it out there.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. And I started my business 30 years ago, so it was before the internet was out there. We were still, as a matter of fact, I didn't even have a computer. I had a memory typewriter and a thermopaper fax machine.
I had one of those things, Kathleen. I had one of those. It wasn't the big brand at the time, wasn't it? A brand called Brother or something, a Japanese thing.
Yes, yes.
It was like a computer, but not a computer. All you could do is like type words on it, but it was the coolest device ever, right? And I remember having that
compared
thing.
to an IBM typewriter.
Right. It was like a miracle product. So yeah, I totally remember what you're saying. But yeah, even pre-internet, that must be. Were you thinking about brand sort of at that time, Kathleen? Because I wouldn't have thought about it in the same way without not only without the internet, but even without even social internet.
No, what's so interesting as you were talking is that there was no plan. For me, I needed a job.
Right.
And so I just got out there, and again, the good old fashioned way, you either used what's called the telephone or you knocked on people's door and hoped that somebody would give you a chance, because other than that, it was just putting an ad in the Sunday paper. So it's really changed. And I think, again, to your point about people holding back until they wait for that perfect moment when they have all of their ducks in a row, they really do miss out on a lot, because I think it was 20 years before I even had a strategic plan.
Yeah.
And I did just fine until then.
Kathleen, it's a great example. And I really wish younger people in particular, I hope they're hearing this, because I do see a lot of people that are just holding themselves back unnecessarily. And you just think, you know what, if you just did this one time, you'd realize it's not a big deal, and you'll do it the second time and the third time and the fourth time, and you keep doing it. And as you go, you'll actually get better, it'll get easier, and you'll make more impact. And ultimately, from a BD point of view, I mean, ultimately, personal branding may be described, in terms of end game. It's all about, maybe trying to position yourself in a place where, you've got opportunities to work with customers and what have you. Ultimately, I think the most efficient way to get there. Imagine doing what you acquiring the customers that you might have without doing any branding or without doing any kind of inbound stuff. You'd be making a huge amount of phone calls, or you'd be knocking on a huge amount of doors. And as the world kind of moves forward as the way it is, those old techniques are going to ask you to do more and more and more until eventually you can't possibly do them anymore. So yeah, I think it's vital that people think along these lines and kind of get into this new information environment, I think is a good way to think about it.
Yeah. Well, and I think we all want to have our business grow because of referrals and recommendations, right? It's the greatest way but then there's a lifespan to that, right? And so I do think that that's where the branding becomes really important. And I know one of the challenges that we have in our business over here, and I'd be curious to know with the community that you have, this global community that you have in the recruitment space, if you had heard of recruitment research prior to us engaging or, even hearing about my book, because here in the United States, again, I've been doing this for 30 years and I talk to people and they're like, I didn't realize there was a third approach. There was traditional recruiting, which is predominantly the difference is that companies pay a percentage of the candidate's salary for a candidate. And in recruitment research, they are paying someone to go out there and really hunt for candidates that are currently employed and their competitors or in a like industry and paying for it by the hour. And so it's still not part of the conversation here in the States. And I'm just curious if that model is elevating its voice in the community that you are part of.
I'm going to give you a straight answer to this, Kathleen, and the answer is no. I think it's interesting about recruiting is that it is one of the most difficult things to innovate in terms of revenue model. And I think in large part that's because the industry is just so used to the pay a percentage on salary deal or pay margin on hourly if you're going to go contingency. I think that's like so ingrained in terms of how people understand how recruiting works. People who are trying to sell alternative models, I think, really struggle to get any kind of headway. And it seems that I would say in the UK, and even I'd speak on behalf of Europe also, we're talking 95%, if not more, maybe even 99% would still be based on that model of, okay, you supply candidates, we will pay you a percentage of salary if we hire. I would say that's still a dominant model. There's a few companies that would still work, let's say, more on retainer side, where a percentage of that fee would be paid up front. Typically, they're more mature or maybe exec search type firms that have the brand power to be able to argue the case. But in terms of innovating on the revenue model, it is still very, very very much the way it was for probably since year dot, and that's as much as a fault, if it is such a thing as a fault, but it's a zero risk play for the client. And I think, clients often push agencies to work in this way, and agencies often prefer not to resist that push because it's like, okay, what is the point? Ultimately we might be able to just deliver according to these terms. But I wish it would change, because one of the big drivers to the negative behaviors you do see in recruiting, I think, can be traced precisely back to this kind of high risk revenue model that agencies typically have to work to.
And I think that you nailed it when you said it's the zero risk play for the client. And in this crazy environment that we're in now, we're trying to get the clients to understand that they've got as much skin in the game as the external recruiting firm that they're working with. And it's critical that they have that tight partnership with the candidate so that they can get them across the finish line. And so many companies that are not able to get the candidate across the finish line is because they just think, well, I'm going to let the recruiter do all that work. I've got plenty of other things going on in my day that I just don't have the time. But we're telling our clients here in the States that, if you don't start staying engaged with that candidate from the moment that you decide that you like them and want to pursue them as a serious candidate till the day that they sign on, and I guess they're not walking in the door necessarily anymore, they're going to lose that candidate. Are you seeing that in your world as well?
Yes, so I would say that the advice that you're giving is exactly the sort of value add service that would be much appreciated by the client side. There's a lot of companies, I think, overly used to very transactional experience with recruiters. And recruiters on their side, may see that their job is done once they've submitted. So a higher touch, I think, and getting closer to the agency supplier, getting closer to the end employer, I think is a natural pressure that is happening as a result of this candidate short market. Definitely, we need to be working more closely with the end client in order to hire the people that they're telling us that they urgently need to hire. The role for the recruiter there is to really nudge the customer to do the right things in order to make that happen.
That's a great point. Well, hold on a minute, Hung. We have to press pause here, but coming up in the second part of my discussion with Hung Lee, the award-winning editor of Recruiting Brainfood, Hung talks about what the future of recruitment looks like.
I think right now it seems to be sometimes change doesn't happen unless there's a crisis. This candidate short crisis, I think, is certainly nudging a lot of these initiatives that were probably always been in the pipeline, but they're starting to elevate these into things that actually need to happen.
This has been Revolutionizing Recruitment with Kathleen Duffy. To connect with Kathleen or to learn more about recruitment research, go to duffygroup.com.